right-wing extreme groups, or at least has been or have been some groups of that kind in Norway. But again, I very much underline that we will not speculate. We will await the investigation from the police before we say anything more about this particular case. But it's part of our of the work of our police to also follow this kind of right-wing extreme groups.
Norwegian Prime Minister speaking there at a press conference right after the attacks. You're watching the World News. When we come back, not constructive, China rejects statements by the Philippines that its sovereignty claim to the South China Sea is baseless. And also we'll head over to Africa, fleeing the drought. The population at the world's biggest refugee complex in Kenya now hits 300,000 as many flee starvation in Somalia. Welcome back to the World News. A spokesman for the Chinese delegation at the ASEAN Regional Forum in Bali has refuted statements made by the Philippines on the South China Sea. The Philippines acting Foreign Minister Albert Del Rosario said Saturday that Beijing's sovereignty claim to the area is baseless. Liu Weimin, a spokesman for the delegation, responded by saying that facts prove that the Philippine side's remarks are totally groundless and will only complicate the issue. Liu said many delegates at the meeting hold the view that such remarks are not constructive nor conducive to the settlement of the issue. During his address to the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, China's Yang Jiechi says disputes over sovereignty claims should be resolved by all parties concerned through dialogue and consultation. He called on them to work closer to step up mutual trust and to expand their cooperation. In 2002, China and ASEAN adopted the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. Yang Jiechi said the recent agreement between China and ASEAN nations to implement that text is an encouraging achievement. Saturday was the end of the Foreign Ministers meeting over in Bali. One of the most noteworthy breakthroughs from the last couple of days is an agreement for the DPRK in South Korea as they work together to restart the stalled six-party talks. The North's newly appointed nuclear envoy Ri Hong-yo met face-to-face with the South's Ri Song-luk on the sidelines of Asia's largest security forum. Their three-hour meeting was the first between nuclear envoys from the two sides since the talks stalled in 2008. The two diplomats say they agreed to make efforts to resume the six-party mechanism and that their meeting had been very constructive. The presence of diplomats from all six nations involved in the talks, the US, China, Russia, Japan, the DPRK and South Korea in Bali this time, raised hopes of a breakthrough. Also, the message from the two nuclear envoys has been positive and encouraging, as we hear now.
In the talks, we confirmed our resolve to firmly implement the September 19th joint statement and expressed our intention to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We agreed to make efforts to resume the six-party talks soon. The talks were conducted in a candid and sincere atmosphere.
We discussed each other's position. South Korea and the DPRK agreed to put various joint efforts towards the process of negotiations for denuclearization. We will continue the process and put the effort in so that we can create conditions to resume the six-party talks.
Let's head now to Libya, where NATO has carried out more airstrikes on Tripoli. One of the targets bombed was Muammar Gaddafi's headquarters in Bab al-Zizia. Witnesses say they saw jets and heard loud explosions at about 2 a.m. local time on Saturday. NATO began its airstrikes in spring to attack forces loyal to the longtime leader, but Gaddafi has so far kept his grip firmly on Tripoli. Libyan officials accused NATO of bombing a factory on Friday close to the oil city of Brega, killing 6 guards in that new attack. Young protesters over in Egypt have vowed to remain in Cairo's Tahrir Square until their demands are met. The military police fired shots in the air and beat demonstrators who were blocking the main road in Alexandria on Friday. Another incident in the port city of Suez angered hundreds of demonstrators who are camping out in Tahrir Square. The ruling military council has denied the authorities used force against the protesters. The council has accused the April 6 movement, one of the groups behind the protest that toppled Hosni Mubarak are trying to drive a wedge between the armed forces and the people. April 6th described the army statement as misleading allegations. Also, protesters are demanding more freedom for the civilian government, an end to military trials, and setting a time frame for the completion of demands for more reforms. The Egyptian government, though, has announced its newly reshuffled government lineup. The new ministers took an oath in front of the president of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. This force has ruled Egypt since former leader Hosni Mubarak was overthrown back in February. The reshuffle comes as a response to protesters who are calling for faster reforms over in Tahrir Square. Our correspondent Abdel El Marouki has this report from Cairo.
The new government was finally announced. Egyptian Prime Minister Assam Sharaf changed over half of the ministers in his former government. Some of the ministers dismissed were appointed by President Mubarak. The surprise came to many when General Mansour al-Isawi, the Interior Minister, remained in the government after failing to restore security to the country. After the announcement of the new government with few hours, on Thursday, Prime Minister Sharaf gave a speech to the nation. He promised to form a betrayal law that will deal with many political corruption cases. He also promised the establishment of a social fund to support all families of people injured or martyred during the revolution. Moreover, he announced the Interior Minister will allow human rights organizations to inspect the Egyptian prisons, giving protesters many of their demands. Yet thousands of protesters went to Tahrir Square this Friday.
I believe that changing more than 13 ministers is the product of the protests. Generally, this is a positive phenomenon, but more change is required. Both the Interior Minister and the Justice Minister must leave for their failure of regaining security and providing justice in the country.
The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces gained all its powers after former President Mubarak stepped down. The Council have all these powers but don't know what to do with it because the political arena is not their expertise, while Prime Minister Sharaf is doing all the operational work with no authoritative powers to do them.
The usual numbers of protesters visiting Tahrir Square have been decreasing every Friday. Yet people have started hanging lanterns near their tents, declaring that they will remain in Tahrir Square when the fasting month of Ramadan begins. Many political parties came to Tahrir Square today to support Prime Minister Assam Sharaf's government and give it another chance. However, they believe that true change will come to this country when the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces give this government more freedom and more power. Adel Al-Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Let's head now to Africa, where the world's largest refugee camp, set up at the start of Somalia's civil war in 1991, was supposed to house 90,000 people. Now there are more than 300,000 crammed inside. Of all of them come here just for a chance of getting a meal. Our correspondent Alan Chiror brings us this story from Kenya.
Hungry and exhausted, families escape the worst drought southern Somalia has seen in decades, which has already claimed the lives of tens of thousands of people, according to the United Nations. More than 6 out of every 10,000 people are dying of hunger every day in some parts of Bakul and Lower Shabelle regions of Somalia. The United Nations has now declared the situation a famine. They come here to Dadaab, the world's biggest refugee settlement, not because the drought situation in Kenya is any better, but because here they have a chance of getting a meal.
Many of them are either pastoralists or agro-pastoralists, and they are fleeing famine in Somalia. They say it has not rained for like 3 or more years, and they have lost all their livestock. There's of course no food in the fields, in the farms. So they're fleeing famine and trying to come here to see whether they can get food.
While there has been numerous disasters in the Horn of Africa over the past decade, it is the first time a famine has been declared in the region since 1992, when hundreds of thousands of Somalis starved to death. The meager food rations given to them can only sustain them for a short while before hunger starts biting back. Mohammed Said, a 43-year-old father of 4, is a refugee at the new arrivals camp in Dadaab. He has to deal with the challenge of looking after his children in these harsh conditions.
I received this food 2 weeks ago, and this is all that is remaining. I now have to wait for another week for another food ration, yet I have 4 children. I really don't know what I'm going to do.
Mohammed's situation is not unique to him. He is just one among hundreds of thousands who share the same plight at the refugee camp. The World Food Programme is also facing a 90% deficit in their food reserves. It is now left to the donor nations to respond to this humanitarian crisis in the Horn of Africa. Other countries in the region, in particular Ethiopia and Kenya, are also facing a crisis because of failure of rains in pastoral areas. With this being the worst situation for 60 years in some places, as well as soaring food prices and long-term issues such as underdevelopment and high population growth across the Horn of Africa. 11 million people are now in dire need of humanitarian assistance.
Here in Dadaab, Kenya, is no different from what these refugees were experiencing in Somalia. And this just goes to show that all they come for here is food and a chance of security. Alan Cheror, CCTV, Dadaab, northeastern Kenya.
7 cameras attached to the cabin of China's manned submersible have fully recorded its 4,000-meter plus test dive over the northeast Pacific. The video shows the Jiaolong descending about 15 stories every minute. 2 LED lights turned on at about 1 kilometer underwater, generating 2 separate beams. Deepwater plankton was seen swimming past the cabin windows. The main aim of this dive is to test the working conditions of the Jiaolong at different depths. A test of LED light effects was carried out at 3,000 meters. And one last story here. Female Tibetan antelopes are heading back home after giving birth near the Zonag Lake in Hosil in China's northwest Qinghai province. On Saturday, the scientific expedition that's tracking the batch of around 1,000 antelopes and the newborns reported seeing them on the banks of the Chuma River. Going through this river is the only way for the Tibetan antelopes. They move slowly along the river as the area is abundant in grass and in water, making it a great place to make a quick pit stop. The antelopes will also have to cross the Qinghai-Tibet highway and railway before they finally reach home. I'm James Chow with the World News. We'll be back in 30 minutes with Asia Today. Do join me then from all of us here. Thanks for watching. See you then.